Hello and welcome to my sewing room. I'm Pearl Pereira. I'm starting a series of 5 videos that I'll be posting on my website, my Facebook page, and my YouTube channel. Today's video is all about how to use the applique pressing tool and the applique stiletto. I hope you enjoy the video and I'll see you in the demo. Okay, we're ready to start. Now, the Off-The-Block Applique has all of my applique techniques in here. There's 150 color photos in here, and I talk about a lot of the things that I'm going to be showing you. And then there's some things that I come up with along the way, you know, since I've written this book, and I may be showing you those techniques also later on in some following videos. My iron in my right hand, and in my left hand I used the stiletto because it was too awkward to learn how to iron with my left hand. It just didn't feel right. So I iron with my right hand still, and I use my left hand for my stiletto. It's important to keep your hand grounded on the ironing mat because that's what gives you control over your tips of your fingers. If you're holding your hand up like this and on balancing it with one of your fingers, you still don't have as much control. And I find that beginning quilters, they even go a little bit further with having their whole hand up in the air, and this does not give you very much control over your stiletto. So make sure that you put your hand down on the ironing mat. You can put a pin inside your shape to help keep it from chasing it around the ironing mat. And on pieces that are convex, like this one is an oval, it's convex almost all the way around, I will start by coming up underneath with my iron and just flipping that seam allowance over so that I can catch it with my stiletto, and then I will pull my seam allowance as I move forward. And I'm moving forward and one pull at a time so that I'm evenly distributing the fullness of that fabric all the way around. And by doing this, that gives you that even distribution of fabric. Now, I usually only get wet about 1 inch at a time when I'm working, because that way your template doesn't start to get soft. Because if I go too far, then the phone will ring and I'll get up and I'll come back and my template is all saturated or my starch is dry. So it really doesn't do me any good to get much further than that. Now I would go all the way around the shape, and once I had it done, then I would turn it over to the front and I would look at it and I say, does it look exactly the way I want? And if it does, then I'm ready to go on. And if it doesn't, let's say it had a sharp point out here, what would happen is I would just come back and I would just get that area of that seam allowance damp, and then I could just pull that area in. So if I see any imperfections that I don't like, once I have it turned, it's very easy to fix them right then and there. Now, this is a shape, it's a tail for a bird, and it has some quite large concaves on it, but they're really good for beginners because it gives you a little bit more working time and experience with these larger shapes than when you start to work with something smaller. And I will be showing you something smaller. I'm going to start over here, and this time I'm going to do like 2 inches because I want to quickly get up to the area that I want to demo. And once you get the hang of doing this, it becomes much quicker as you go along. Now I'm approaching this concave over here. I still have a bit of a convex right here to go around, so I'm still going to need to gather. But in this concave, I need to clip. So my clips are, I'd clipped to about 1/8 of an inch away from my paper, and then I'm going to turn my scissor to the right and to the left and make a cut, and then I'll go back and right and left again. Now I've clipped 4 times, and one of the things that you can do is you can put your finger in here to see if you can easily touch the template. If you can, then you know that you have enough clips. If you couldn't, everything would move. Okay. Now to do this concave, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get the concave area damp and this convex area here with starch, and I'm going to iron until I get to the point where I saw that first clip I made on this edge. So as soon as I see that, I will stop ironing. Because when you're using the pressing tool, you iron from the front of your piece. So my openings will be facing me, so the U-shape area will be facing me. This hand will push toward me. I'll place my tool on top of my piece, kind of guessing, and you can kind of estimate where it needs to go. Lay it down, and then when I flip the tool up, I'm going to be pushing the tool away from me. So I want to have my two hands pushing towards each other so they'll hold the fabric, and then I will lay the tool down, place my fingers on either side of that area, and put the iron on here. And this is why I call it a pressing tool, an applique pressing tool. Turn the tool to the right, it'll roll to the left. Turn the tool to the left, and it'll roll to the right. And by doing that, it evenly distributes the fullness in that area. You get a really nice distribution of fabric all the way around your concave. So that is the real purpose for the applique pressing tool. It helps you make concave areas. Now I have one here that's a little tighter of a concave. Same thing's going to happen. I'm going to come in here and I'll cut until about 1/8 inch away from the deepest part, and then I'm going to cut to the left, to the right, and then I go back to that center point again and to the right and left again. Now I'm just going to be ironing in this concave. I'm not worried about ironing the rest of this, so I'm just going to come in here and I will flip up my seam allowance, and then with my stiletto I will bring my seam allowance just up over the edge until I see that point where my first clip is. And as soon as you see that, that's where you need to know you need to stop. You're going to turn it over and you're going to work from the front, holding the tool in one hand and the template in your other hand. You're going to push against each other and flip it over, and then you're going to bring your fingers down and you will place your iron on top. Once the iron is on top, you can roll the tool to the right and roll the tool to the left, and that will help you make that really nice concave area in there. Now, once you're done with the template, all you need to do is you need to just hit it with the iron from the front, and then you can easily pull it out and you will hit it with the iron and it'll be ready to go onto your block. Now that will be a different video. Okay, what else do I do with my applique pressing tool? Applique pressing tool I use when I'm doing foundation paper piecing. Now I print out my pieces onto Ultimate Applique template paper because it is a nice lighter weight paper than regular copy paper. So when I perforate it, it will remove much easier than regular sheet paper. So, and because it's freezer paper, when I iron down my first shape, I iron it down, it stays in place. I don't have to worry about it moving. And my second piece, I can line it up on that 1/4 inch seam allowance that I want on there, and then I can flip it over and I can stitch right down this line. Once I come back to the front, then I'm ready to flip this over and then continue sewing. But sometimes when we flip, we don't always get all of our fabric, turned correctly. So I like to come with my wooden iron at the sewing machine and hit it with the pressing tool. That makes that seam nice and flat. Now, I also, at the sewing machine, I also have my iron handy so that I can go ahead and hit this with the iron so that piece of fabric doesn't fall down when I'm ready to insert my next piece. I don't know how many times it's happened to you, but it's happened to me quite often when I will get that previous piece caught in the seam allowance of a new area. Now, once I'm ready to remove this, I have my pieces here and I'm ready to remove them. I'll come and I will just fold on the stitching line. And on that stitching line, I'm going to come and I'm just going to drag my stiletto. It perforates the remaining pieces of freezer paper, and you can easily pull out your template. Another thing I like to do with my pressing tool is I like to open my seams. Now, I like to just come with my pressing tool. I get my pointed end in there, and then I can come back and I can press that seam out. And I like to iron everything, so I iron it nice and flat because that way I know it's going to stay flat when I am piecing my things together. Now, I like to press all of my seams open, and I do this because it gives you a much flatter block, and it's easy to line this up because we don't have that hump that sometimes when we have all the fabric ironed in one direction and all the fabric ironed in the other direction, it doesn't quite nest as nicely as you would like it to. But this way you have an even distribution of fabric, so that allows you to just find that line, that center line, and then I can pin this and I'd stitch this seam. When I open up this seam, I also will press my seam allowance open, and I will have an even distribution of fabric all the way around. It makes it much nicer when you're machine quilting, and your machine quilter will love you for doing that. Another thing that I do with the applique pressing tool is, and I don't do it very often because I don't do a lot of traditional needle turn, but I've had many needle turn ladies tell me that they love the tool because they can just take it with them. They don't need an iron, and if they use freezer paper, they'll have their pieces ironed onto freezer paper, but many of them just use like a acid-free paper or cardstock. So they would just pin it or baste it in place. And then what they like to do is they like to come along and they will pull the fabric up and just crease it with their fingers. Now, it doesn't require an iron, and it doesn't require you burning yourself. So that is another reason why they like doing it. Now, once you've done that, because you have a hard surface that you're working on, your piece wants to turn exactly where you put that crease in there. So if you were putting this on your background and you were ready to stitch, then you would baste this down, and I would do it with my pressing tool just because I like the mobility of it in my hand. It's a larger movement, and then I would just start stitching, and then I can continue to turn that under as I go around, and it goes around quite nicely because you already have that crease in there, so the fabric wants to turn on that crease. One very last tip for you is that this is a sanding sponge, fine grit, and I cut them into like 1-inch squares, and I keep them in my little toolbox where I'm sewing. And what I use this for is if you drop your tool and you blunt your end, you can kind of bring it back. Takes a little sanding, but you will can take out any imperfection that you may have put into it. Or maybe you want it sharper than it is. Now, I used mine on some paint. You can probably barely see it now. I've been trying to get it off of there. And if you get glue on there, because sometimes when I'm gluing my shapes down, the stiletto's there, but I can't find it, I will just use the applique pressing tool to help me lay down my fabric when I'm doing my gluing. So sometimes it gets residue on it, and in that case I will sometimes just come and I will clean it off by turning it and getting that glue off of there. If you find that maybe your stiletto has like a little burr on the end of it when you receive them, that's probably because we missed that one. And if you do, you can just, with a sanding sponge, you can just knock off that little burr. Although some people tell me they like that little burr on there, but I do try to make sure that all of them are tested before we insert them. But if you drop your tool on a hard surface like the floor or into the carpet, or and you happen to blunt that tip slightly, you can try to bring it back with the sanding sponge. It will make a difference. Or if you just feel like your tip is getting a little dull, it's another way to sharpen it. And I just do it just like this. I just keep turning the tool in my hand. So that's it for today's demo on the applique stiletto and the applique pressing tool. doing. I hope that you will join me for the remainder of the videos. Thank you. Have a great day. Keep stitching and keep smiling.